Welcome to Born to Run, the naked truth, a broadcast dedicated to examining all the claims, conjectures, and theories I proposed in Born to Run. Back in 2009, Eric Orton first sold me on the idea that everything we needed to know about fitness, everything from how we eat to how we breathe to how we move our bodies, had been discovered 10,000 years ago. I've been following his advice ever since. And now that we're about to release the sequel, Born to Run 2, it's time to ask the question, does any of this stuff really work? Like, whatever happened to those five-finger toe shoes? And what actually makes chia seed any better than a poppy seed? And for me, the most important question of all, is there truly one single way to run that's better than all the rest? In these episodes, we're going to reach out to people who know a lot more than we do, like physiologist Dr. Irene Davis and anthropologist Dr. Herman Ponzer. Best of all, we're going to reunite with the original Born to Run Mas Loco crew and see if today they're still running free. This is episode 1, in which we tell the secret backstory of how Born to Run originally came to be.
I was born to run too.
Back in Colorado 2005, you were commissioned to do an article on my training here in Jackson Hole for one of the magazines, and I just remember first meeting and knowing that you'd gotten back from the Copper Canyon for the first time, and I'm like, holy cow, we're going to talk more about this than this stupid article that we're doing. And that's, I don't know if you remember, I was just like asking questions, and that's all I wanted to know about. And here we are, focused on me wanting to having to do this, crazy article for the magazine. And so we hit day one, and we're doing these crazy exercises on a mountain and all this. And I just remember you just keep saying how much you wanted to run, and how I essentially just went back that night and ripped up my script and said, okay, day 2, instead of this article, we're going to focus on getting Chris confident that he could be a runner that he wanted to be. And we spent day 2 at Denver City Park doing intervals and chopping wood and talking about your running. So, and then we sat at the one of the golf course holes, the greens, and just heard you about this crazy race in the Copper Canyon, and it all kind of went from there.
Yeah, isn't it funny that Born to Run began with an act of sabotage? That we were both supposed to be doing this article for Men's Journal. I was out there, and I remember they had a very specific reason they wanted the article, because they had this idea that you were combining multiple activities in one, that you would, sort of package a run with a bike ride and a swim or something like that, which A, was completely wrong concept, but B, neither one of us cared, because once we started to talk and we realized that there was this adventure I had just had with the Tarahumara, and that I was still trying to process it, and that you had been learning that stuff from afar for years, and these two forces came together, and instantly the article was like out the window. From my perspective, what had happened was, I was down in Mexico for a different magazine article, which I almost sabotaged as well. I was there to look for members of this like weird brainwashing rock and roll sex cult, this singer named Gloria Trevi, who was bringing in these like background singers and brainwashing them for her manager. So I was down there to research that, and then I heard about these legendary runners down the Copper Canyons, and I immediately got distracted and ran off in search of the Tarahumara, found them, found Micah True, Caballo Blanco, and for the first time I got this inkling of like, hey, you know what? Running is just not this thing you bash away at. Running is actually this fine art, this craft, like jujitsu, like ballet. It's a fine craft. And if you learn the craft, you will get the results. It's very Karate Kid stuff. You learn how to paint the fence, you'll learn how to move your arms. You can't just jump to the moving the arms part. But then I come back from the Copper Canyons and I'm like, great, I've now seen people painting the fence, but no one showed me how to paint the fence. And that's where you came in. So you became my wise Mr. Miyagi out there having me waxing on and waxing off.
Well, and that's how I always looked at the Tarahumara Indians, is that, back when I first heard about them back in 2000 or 1992 and 3, when they first went to Leadville, I was in Colorado at that time, and this whole mountain running, ultra running universe was new to me. And back then, there was no internet. You couldn't learn about all we can learn about these days. And so it was like a lot of mythology, that the allure of how these people ran like they did. And now you walk in, we meet, and now I'm able to hear it right from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, but it's kind of funny. So again, it is a perfect marriage because you're the guy who is desperate to see it for yourself. I'm the guy who has seen it, but I don't know what to make of it. So,
Right.
you knew what to make of it, but you hadn't seen it. I had seen it, didn't know what to make of it. So two of us come together. And I remember being both optimistic but skeptical at the same time. Like, yeah, I believe it works, but not for me. I believe in theory this stuff makes sense, but for some people, not everybody. And that to me ends up being, I think, the organizing thought that has remained with me now for the past 15 years of working with you, is finally breaking through to believing, yes, this is for absolutely everybody. Because first couple of years, dude, I was kind of like, yeah, it's working so far. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good so far, but I kept waiting for the bottom to drop out, and it was because that's the message you get repeatedly from the world of running. If you don't buy these shoes, you're going to get hurt. If you don't do this, you're going to get hurt. If you don't have the right training, but you're going to get hurt. And that phrase, "you're going to get hurt," is so attached to running. And you're the first person that said, "Forget about it. Forget it. You don't have to get hurt."
Well, and I think that speaks to one of the first few, what we put into the training plan when we started to train for the 50 milers, that you were doing hill repeats, and you ramped up your miles very, very quickly. And this wasn't the 10% rule. It was understanding what you needed to do, and it was working on both ends of the spectrum of learning to run easy well, and introducing some sprints and a lot faster running, and how beneficial that can be. And it kind of turns that base building, philosophy a little bit on its head.
Yeah, that's a really kind of interesting point because that was the central dilemma right from the get-go. So here we are in Denver. I'm supposed to be interviewing you for this Men's Journal article. The two of us are like, screw that. We're way more interested in this other thing. And so we go to the park and you have me take my shoes off and we start to experiment with this idea of like, can you teach me how to run well enough with enough miles so that within a year or even less than a year, I can get back down to the Copper Canyon for a 50-mile race on very difficult terrain. And so from that first meeting, I think we both had a challenge in front of us. Number one was me. I would have to sign on for this. I'd have to decide, yeah, you know something, I'm going to go for it and listen to what this guy said. A guy that I just met the day before, who is going against everything I've ever heard. I was a writer for Runner's World at the time. So, I was supposed to be knowledgeable, and everything you're telling me was the exact opposite of everything that was in that magazine every single month. And then from your perspective, you're taking this big 230, 40-pound jabroni who has a whole history of injuries. And I don't know how old I was, dude. I was in my 40s, 30s. I mean, it's been 14 years. Yeah. So I was probably pushing 40 years old at that point. This late life guy with a history of running injuries and a skeptic who's wearing like Nike Vomeros. And can you both change his approach to running and ramp up his stamina and speed at the same time?
And I think that's actually what speeded up the process in a good way is that, yeah, you could look at it that way as, hey, we don't have enough time. Because at that point it was, I think it was the early spring. At that point, we were thinking the race was going to be in November.
Right.
Okay. So here we're, that window is pretty short. Luckily, it got bumped back to March a little bit, but I think that actually helped the process because, hey, we've got to jump into this. And actually, what you needed was not the typical just base building. Hey, you just got to run more. You needed to really, really train the structural system that was actually more quality type of training that actually was also needed to facilitate the speed up process. So it all kind of was a perfect storm, but it really, really helped.
I'm writing a note here. I
Yep.
just came up with the title of this episode, Born to Run, Built on Sabotage. And the reason why is because the second act of sabotage was the reason why the race was postponed from November was because Micah sprained his ankle. Do you know how he sprained his ankle?
Ooh, I'm just now assuming that it was running, but no, I guess it's a trick question, right?
I love the fact that even you are in for revelation. I got a very angry, I wouldn't say angry, very grumpy, grumpy email from Micah that October, November. So when I was down the Copper Canyon and I met him, I had brought a pair of running shoes that I had bought from a Nike outlet in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. As I was heading down there, I hadn't run in I don't know how many years, 2 or 3 years, whatever. And so I didn't have any running shoes. So I went to the Nike outlet and bought a pair of shoes that looked good to me. They know, nice big heel, and they might have had those shocks in them and all kinds of stuff. They looked fancy. They had to be good. So I buy these running shoes and I go down to the Copper Canyon. And when I meet Micah, he takes me out for a run and I'm wearing these running shoes. And he's looking at these things like, what in the crap are strapped to your legs? And I'm like, well, these are, these shoes. And uh, he mocked them so much that I realized, okay, well, I can't wear these things anymore. So when I left, I said, hey man, do you want these shoes? And he's looking at them like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe for like hiking or something. And so I gave him those running shoes because I realized I'm not going to wear them anymore. Gave him to Micah. A couple months later, I get an email from him like, hey man, those shoes you gave me, I tried to go for a run in them and I sprained my ankle, man. Like, thanks. And I realized, holy shit, the running shoes that I gave him are the reason why the race ended up getting postponed for another like 6 months.
It was a plan all along.
Yeah, something bigger forces than us. But yes, that was the second act of accidental sabotage. Number one, we sabotaged the Men's Journal article. Number two, I sabotaged the crap out of Caballo's ankle, which then gave us a little bit of breathing time.
And it also allowed us to bring together the Mas Locos. I mean, because
Yeah.
think about it, because if that race was in November, at that point, it could have been just you and I.
That's a good point. So let's see, what was Scott up to? He would have been coming off of his summer crazy ass
Right.
racing season, Western States / Badwater. Yeah, Jen and Billy would have been in school, in college. Yeah, who knows where anybody would have been. Oh, and there just wasn't enough fuse. There wasn't enough runway to even
Right.
reach these people and talk them into. Because that was the second big challenge was, the problem is here you have Micah True, whom no one's ever heard of, living in a hut in one of the most remote parts of the entire North American continent. And he wants to create this race with a group of people who are the most reclusive humans also in the North American continent. So he wants to create this race. No one knows who the hell he is or who the Tarahumara are. And so he can't reach anybody. So I was like his one little messenger pigeon out of the canyons back to the
Right.
known world. And I was supposed to kind of publicize this thing. But what allowed it to be publicized was in that period of time, I wrote an article for Runner's World about my experience down in the Copper Canyon. That I had met this guy, Micah True. I had seen the Tarahumara in action. And I ended that article with this little message that, and by the way, this guy, Micah True, wants to create this race at the bottom of the Copper Canyon, hitting the best American ultra runners against these legendary champions. And so I put that in the article, sent it out there, and it really didn't register with anybody except really with Scott Jurek, because Micah had already been sending like some kind of wacky ass letters to Scott
Right.
Jurek, care of I don't know who. So Scott had been invited to this race, but he just kind of tossing these things aside because who's this guy? And now he sees it in the article, and suddenly these invitations he'd been receiving for the past couple of years now has a little bit of credibility.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. So I don't know when you started talking with Billy and Jen, or did you even talk with Barefoot Ted, or did he just kind of come into the picture? How did that come about?
So Jen and Billy is the only contact I really recollect. I got a message from Scott Jurek saying, "Hey, so what's the deal with this guy? You know, I've also heard from him. I'd never met Scott. So again, I was completely brand new to the ultra running world. I mean, it seems strange
Right.
now because it feels now like ultra running has been around forever. But back in the day, 2003, 2004, it was a very new, very niche sport. You know, it was like swim run or something is now. Some
Right.
people out there were doing it, but if you weren't in that bubble, it just seemed like a little tribe of
Yeah.
crazies out there running
Right.
100-mile races. And I was among the people outside the bubble. So even then, I had just heard about ultra marathoning, and I'm like, what? 4 marathons in a row? It's impossible. You know, Fitbitty's died. What are you talking about? And so I was very new to this world, and I barely knew the name Scott Jurek. And I learned about him as I was doing this article for Runner's World. And then I get a message from the guy saying, "Hey, by the way, I've also heard from this guy, Micah True. You know, what's the deal?" And I'm like, "Well, all I can tell you is he's alive. You know, he's real. The rest of
Right.
it, I can't say." And then I, one of the things I had learned while researching that very first article about my experience in the Copper Canyon was I come across this fact that in ultra running, men and women are much more equitable than they are in shorter distances. Like as distances get longer, the differences between men and women diminishes. And so I was doing an article about top female ultra marathoners, about how, you know, on any given ultra, it's a coin toss. Who's going to be the first to cross the line, a man or a woman? And one of the women I interviewed was Jen Shelton. You know, she was this hot shot 20,
Right.
21-year-old at the time in Virginia Beach. She was finishing top 2, top 3 in a bunch of these East Coast ultras. And she was slated to be like the next big champion, you know, next Ann Trayson, Chrissy Mel to
Right.
break through. So I interview her. And as you came to realize when you met Jen, talking to her is a roller coaster. Like the conversation's all over the place. You don't know what the hell she's going to say. But on the other hand, you also feel a certain freedom. Like you can also say whatever the hell's on your mind. So this
Exactly.
conversation, which started as a conventional interview, by the end is kind of like my conversation with you. By the end, it just veered off course. And I'm like, hey, by the way, you know, do you know about Tanamata and Micah True? And she had read the Runner's World article also. And she's like, yeah, what's the deal, dude? Well, there's going to be this race. And if you're in, you're in. And that was it. As for Barefoot Ted, I don't think I ever
Wasn't
heard
he
from him.
talking with Scott? Or it seemed like there was that connection, and he kind of just slipped in.
Yeah. If it wasn't Scott, it would have been Lewis. So Ted was running with the there's a like a Los Angeles mountain running club. He was running with those guys. I think they had some members who either were descended from Tarahumara, but definitely had roots in the Copper Canyon, Chihuahua area. So
Right.
Ted was running with guys up in the mountains, in the San Gabriel Mountains, with people who were familiar with the Tarahumara. So it was in Ted's brain, along with millions of other things. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if he and Lewis, because they were living nearby. Ted was in Burbank,
Okay.
Lewis was in Santa Maria, and so I, to me, it's more likely those two guys had contact. And then
Got
Lewis
it.
probably said, "Oh yeah, here's this guy. You know, reach out to him." But again, I don't think he ever reached out to him. I think he just showed the hell up.
Right. Got it. Got it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, yeah,
So there we are.
crazy.
Come March, you and I have been working together since the previous summer, and I am feeling this. I wouldn't call it optimism. I would feel more like I believe the tools work. You know, I'm not sure if I can use the tools, but I believe this drill will work. I believe this hammer actually will drive a nail. The question is whether I can actually use these tools. But I'm starting to feel a little bit hopefully. Okay, you know what? Maybe I got the tools, but I'm having a hell of a hard time making any contact with Caballo. I send him an email. I hear nothing for 3 weeks, and not just an email like, "Hey, dude, how you doing?" It's more like, "Please tell us exactly where we're going." No answer. "Please tell us where we're going to meet." No answer. And this will go on for like 3 or 4 weeks. Now we're into February, and you had just had a baby back
Yep.
in December, right?
In
Yeah.
December. Yeah.
So your
Eh,
daughter is born. You're in Wyoming. You're getting massacred by storms. So now we're coming into February, and I don't know if you can make it. I highly doubt anybody else is going to show. Why would Jen and Billy? I haven't heard from Jen in 3 months. Scott, why would he do this? And so as we fly down to the launching spot in El Paso, I remember seeing you come off the plane and feeling, oh, thank God, at least one guy's here.
Yeah. I remember wandering around the airport, and then I think I actually stumbled on Billy and Jen first before I even saw you. And like there was nobody in the airport except of us. And
Yeah,
so yeah, and then yeah, then before you know it, we're in some bar sitting next to Scott Jurek and Billy and Jen and Barefoot Ted, and here we go.
yeah.
It was like being in a zone after that. Everything just kind of fell into place. There's
What
no
are you
reason.
talking? What are you talking about? There was no zone. you
Oh,
you're
I
you're skipping way ahead, dude. The zone, the zone began that night with you
right.
guys all going
Yep.
out for burritos, which
Yep.
Jen and Billy decided to turn into margaritas. So
Yep.
we arrive in El Paso, teeny tiny airport, and we're in a hotel next to the airport. And the whack pack starts to gather. Scott shows up. Um, his name is- Scott shows up. Uh, Lewis is there. Barefoot Wingnet shows up. Jen and Billy, and then you guys all go out to get some food and drinks. And as you probably learned, like from now doing a shit ton of road tours, I like to stay close to base. If I'm not actually
Yep.
doing something, I want to just chill in the hotel. So you guys all went out. I went up to the room. You and I were sharing a room. And next thing I know, you came in, you go to bed. And sometime after that, I don't know, did you bring Jen and Billy in? How did they end up in our room?
Yeah. So we all came back in a taxi or so. I can't remember
It
how
was a
we
hotel. It was the hotel. Wasn't the hotel van?
yeah, maybe that's what it was. Is that however, we got back to the hotel, and like in the lobby, like Jen's jumping over furniture, um and I can't remember, but the next thing we knew, yeah, we're in our suite, and I think Billy was like, wasn't he in the bathroom getting sick? And
Billy was.
Jen's
Billy was.
like Jen's like in my bed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is off the record.
Ain't no off the record, buddy.
Yeah,
Because yeah, Bill,
exactly.
you can viciously. Jen curled up at the foot of your bed,
Yep.
and then I get a phone call sometime later from the lobby saying, "Hey, your friend's down here." Like, my friend. And I get down, and there's Jen. She'd wandered back out of the room and
Yep.
was wandering. So anyway, that was day one. The next day, they are so hungover. We're trying to catch buses. We're trying to get everyone across the border. We get down to the town of Creel. Finally, there's Caballo. He takes a look at us, and the look on his face is like, "Oh my God, this is not what I wanted." And then the next day, Jen and Billy get lost. So if by you mean that things continued moving forward against all odds, I will sign on to that premise. But man, it had all of the organization and strategy of a boulder tumbling down a mountain. It's going, You don't know why it's going, you don't know where it's going, but it's going, and that was it. That's basically what we were in for.
Yeah, and I think when I say the word flow or in the zone, it's like, yeah, that boulder's falling, and there's no way we're not going to get hit, but we never did.
Right,
And,
barely.
and everything just seemed, it's like there, all those connection travel itinerary things that we had to meet within like 5 minutes or it would never happen. Everything just started happening, and it just, there's no reason why it should have happened the way it did. And I remember when we kind of, whether it was in Batopilas or wherever, we just kind of had eye contact. We just kind of smiled at each other and we're like,
Yep.
"Hmm,
I don't know why, but it's happening.
yeah,
Hey, I think
yeah,
we should tail off this initial conversation
yep,
with a thought that I had this morning. To
okay,
me, it's the crystallizing thought that is all about what Born to Run's about and Born to Run 2's about. And I think it's what you're about. And I was thinking about a rocket ship on the launch pad, and everyone's like 10, 9. They're all excited about those 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds have already been predetermined. What's going to happen
right,
at the push of the button was already decided months ago. Is the fuel figured out? Is this thing well engineered? Does it have the right gear? Are people properly trained? That's what running is all about. And I don't mean race day. I mean every run. And I think, you would never say to people in a rocket ship, well, the fuel may or may not be good, but yeah, you'll deal with it, or hey, there might be a little bit of a wobble, but you'll be fine. That second engine, it's a little bit, malfunction, but don't worry about it. You never say that. Everything gets locked in: fuel, training, equipment, gear. It's all
yeah,
precisely done so that on the day of that run, you just whoosh. And to me, the big lesson that you shared, and to me is the organizing thought of Born to Run 2, is that every run can be that way.
right,
Dial in your food, dial in your footwear, your fitness, your form, your focus, so that when you got the door, you don't have to deal with a sore Achilles. You don't have to
yeah,
deal with, oh, I feel kind of sluggish or my legs are tight. All these things that most of us accept as part of running would be unacceptable in any other
right,
kind of like an engineer process.
right, right. Bring on the rocket. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's what we're gonna be exploring. Let's bring some people in the next couple of weeks and explore how you prepare the rocket for launch.
Well, and I think that, it speaks to, all the cliches of the, hey, the destination's the journey. And but for you and your training, my whole focus was, hey, there's got to be no surprises come game day. And the entire training program was meant to train your brain. So once you got to that start line, there was going to be no surprises for you. And even that, and that doesn't make it easy, right? But it's you're prepared to be able to handle that difficulty. And I don't know if that speaks to what you're really talking about with the rocket or not, but I think that's kind of was my focus. And and you and I've always talked about creating the joy of running, even though sometimes it's difficult and challenging. That doesn't mean there's not joy in it in a lot of different ways. And to give you the gift of that joy for however you want to use it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean that's it. That's it about the rocket. Once that
Yep.
rocket's ready to go, that's why you never hear about rocket mishaps these days, because they've dialed in everything, the fuel, the training, the equipment so well. The rockets fire all the time, every day, and but I think it does speak to that. But what I love the fact is you had this idea of there being no surprises, not just before the race, but even during the race. During the Copper Canyon race, I remember the time you were in front of me, and you're on the return leg, and you're coming down this hill, and I'm looking up. I'm like, "How is it?" And you go, "It's worse than you think it is."
Yeah.
I'm like,
It's
"Dude,
longer. Yeah.
it's gonna be longer and harder than you think it is." I'm like, "God damn, dude, thanks for the pep talk." But
But
I look back on it and like, yeah, it was right. You know, get your mind ready now.
yeah, I mean, how many times in a race do you hear people, "Oh, you're almost there"? Well, you have this perspective of what almost is, and I wanted you to have like the worst daunting thought in your head So therefore, maybe it doesn't seem as bad as what you would have experienced if I said, yeah, it's not that bad.
Right. Same thing with the rocket ship. You know, you wouldn't say, ah, there's some asteroids. Don't worry about it. No, there's asteroids. Be ready for the
Yeah.
asteroids. You got a hill.
Yeah.
Be ready for the hill. Get your mind into this. And I think the big mistake a lot of people make is because if you assume from the beginning that running is unpleasant and you're going to get hurt, then the response is, well, disassociate from it. You know, put your earbuds in, listen to some music, get it over with. How many times have you seen a runner's world article? You know, run a marathon on only X number of miles per week, like trying to minimize the experience. And you're saying, no, bring it all in, be present, you know, run every mile with your head up. Hey, dude, we're wrapping this down now. So let's just close off, I think, with expression of gratitude to you. The reason we're having this conversation is because of what you opened my eyes to back in the park in Denver 15 years ago.
Well, and I also like to say, hey, a training program or a coach is only as good as the dedication going into that training and the open-mindedness to it. So I think it right back at you.
You know, one thing about that is that it never felt like dedication. In some ways, dedication is forcing you to do something you don't want to do. What to me was so crucial, and the reason I'm still doing this now is because you made me want to do it. It felt good. Every run left me looking forward to the next one.
Well, and real quickly with that is I had to find a way for you to enjoy the things you didn't want to enjoy. The intervals. Remember we talked about, hey, think about what it's like when you're chopping wood.
Yeah.
Hey, you enjoy doing that, but you didn't enjoy doing intervals.
Right.
And we had to create that feeling of chopping wood with your intervals. And
I feel like a very well trained. I feel like a very well trained pet.
Exactly.
All right, dude.
So sweet. Awesome, man. On to the next one.
Caballo Blanco vanished down a canyon on a secret trail. After the revelries,